Brendan O'Neill, chief political writer, of course, at Spiked Online. He's also the author of a brilliant book on what's happened on October the 7th after the pogrom. 7th of October, Israel and the crisis of civilization. And we will no doubt get to that topic in just a couple of moments. A very good morning to you, Brendan.
Hi, Julia.
Thank you for joining us. Let's talk about the winter fuel allowance, which everyone over the age of, or pension age, got until last winter after the announcement, within just weeks of Rachel Reeves taking office as Chancellor last July. Then it got down to just those who are on the very lowest incomes for around about £7,000 a year on pensioner credit, some 10 million lost out. Now, yesterday, we had an announcement, just about this time yesterday, that no, actually it's going to go to three-quarters of pensioners. If they're on an income of 35 grand or less, they are going to get it. Why do you think there was this U-turn? And is it down to, as Rachel Reeves has said, and I no doubt she's saying at GMB Union's Congress, she's speaking out right now, that it's all down to the fact that she's fixed the economy?
Yeah, I doubt very much that it's down to her fixing the economy. It's more that I think they realised just how spectacularly unpopular this was and what an own goal it was for Labour to think that it could just take the mick out of pensioners like that, the bedrock of this society, the people who've been working for decades to keep this society going. The thought that the idea that they could raid their bank balances and take their money was preposterous. I think what it demonstrates is that this Labour government cannot read the room. It is so out of touch with ordinary people's thoughts, with public sentiment, that it really thought it could do something like that to pensioners and that there wouldn't be blowback. So the real story here is that we're ruled by a government that doesn't understand British people.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of it. There is a fair point, though. A caller of ours that just made the point, Darren, that, you know, we only need a winter fuel allowance because our energy prices are so high. Well, that said, we had the winter fuel allowance put into place before we had the complete madness of net zero. But actually, we have low pensions, we have high energy costs, and lots of and homes which are, you know, very badly insulated because a lot of them were built in the 1950s, you know cheap as chips post-war. That actually we've kind of created the problem why we need to have a winter fuel allowance in the first place. What would you say to that?
Oh, I agree. It's the worst of both worlds. So on the one hand, we keep hiking up energy prices with this religion of net zero, this lunatic end of times religion, which says that unless we cut carbon by a certain amount in 10 years, we're all going to fry in an apocalypse. Completely untrue. So they've devoted themselves to this cult, which has the effect of raising those prices. And then they have to bring in this allowance to help older people pay for the basics of life. Yeah. And then they take that allowance away. I mean, as you said earlier on, this is down to the Tories as well as Labour, but we are ruled by dumb people who keep creating these kinds of consequences and don't even recognise that they're responsible for them.
This is part of the problem, isn't it? It's, again, a lack of sort of thinking through policies. And it's interesting, even those people who are much better number crunchers, and I think you or I probably are, pointing out that they said they'd raised £1.5 billion from this Winter Fuel Allowance Act, and it was necessary, all very necessary. Turns out they have, even the Treasury thinks it's about a third of that. Others are saying it's far less than that. It's only about 250 million. These are large sums of money in the big scheme of things, but not in government terms. But they've already spent that 1.5 billion. That's been accounted for elsewhere. So now they won't have that money, even though it was going to be less than it was. So it's an uncosted policy and put the government into more debt unless we have more spending cuts elsewhere or tax rises. I mean, none of this adds up.
None of it adds up. And I've seen that figure as well. 250 million is the kind of lower end of what some people think it will have raised. You know, that's a lot of money to ordinary people like us, but that's peanuts when it comes to government. That is nothing in terms of public spending. So it looks like the whole thing was a complete waste, economically and politically and morally. On every front, this was a disastrous idea. And the fact that it was pushed through is indicative of a ruling class that just doesn't know what it's doing from one day to the next.
That is the worry, isn't it? And again, the civil servants are just as bad. And I want to come on to Greta and Israel because, again, very much in the news recently. But today we found out that 300 Foreign Office civil servants who apparently still think they're political activists, not civil servants, say, we don't like the Gaza policy. We think the UK is basically complicit with what's happening in terms of Israel policy in Gaza. And we're not happy about it. And they've been told by the two most senior civil servants, I think quite rightly, well, you know, if you don't like it, you can resign. It'd be a perfectly honourable move, but you can resign. I find that quite refreshing. Do we hope that they do all resign?
Absolutely. I could not agree more. If you don't agree with such an important policy, which is that we stand with the Jewish state as it fights back against the army of anti-Semites that killed 1,200 people less than 2 years ago, if you don't agree with that central plank of Britain's foreign policy, then bugger off. You should not be in the Foreign Office. That's not where you belong. And, if you want to keep your disagreements to yourself, or you want to raise them privately over lunch with your friends, or maybe even raise them with your boss, that's fine. That's what workplaces are like. But the idea that they can club together these 300 supposedly, socially aware people.
No, I think you'll find they're neutral if you check more closely, like the BBC.
That's exactly what they think of themselves, isn't it? That they are neutral, they're being objective, when in fact we know that they are just activists masquerading as civil servants.
Brendan, Brendan, I think you need to keep up with all the actual. They are the good people. Yeah, you and I are genocidal baby killers. Do try to keep up with all the terminology.
That is exactly what they would say. And, the thing is that these people turn a blind eye to what started this war. They turn a blind eye to the fact that Hamas is still fighting this war. Hamas is still firing guns and missiles. It's still killing IDF troops. The idea that this is just a one-sided genocidal onslaught by Israel against the Palestinian people is a gross lie. It is not based in fact. It is based in a moralistic hatred for the Jewish nation. That's what's driving a lot of this anti-Israel sentiment. And the fact that there is some of that kind of sentiment in the Foreign Office itself, yep, the grand old institution of British diplomatic affairs, that horrifies me.
It really does. It worries me an awful lot. But let's talk more specifically about what has been going on, not just in Gaza, but in Israel. Greta Thunberg and her little gang, the little Freedom Flotilla, didn't quite make it to Gaza. They were intercepted by the Israelis. Claimed by Greta Thunberg in a video recorded before they were intercepted and handed bottles of water and bread and life jackets, that she was being kidnapped. She was being kidnapped, which I think is quite an outrageous thing to say when there are people hostages still right now, 20 months on, still below ground, being tortured and beaten and starved by Hamas, the people who she basically is giving succour to. Israel has just released photographs of Greta Thunberg being deported after her Gaza flotilla of symbolic aid to the Gazan people was seized. Interestingly, the Israeli authorities were going to plan to show these Hamas apologists, which is what they are, the 45-minute video, which I'm pretty sure you've seen, of the horrors of what happened on October the 7th, because there's so much borderline, denial of what happened on October the 7th by these sorts of people. They refused to see it, but they've been put on planes. What's interesting, of course, I thought this climate campaigner didn't go on planes, but apparently quite happy to get on a plane out of Israel.
I hope she is going to offset the carbon of that flight. That's what I'm thinking.
Plant a tree.
She's got to plant some trees when she gets back to wherever she lives these days. But, Julia, if it's true that Greta and her idiot friends refused to watch the footage of 7th of October, we need to talk about how disgusting that is. Yeah. To refuse to look at the horrors committed by those anti-Semites against Jews in Israel 20 months ago, that is unforgivable. That is pure moral blindness. Yeah. And these are supposed warriors for human rights, and they refuse to look at one of the worst assaults on human rights of this century so far. Yeah. These are people who call themselves anti-fascist, and they refuse to look at the truth of what a gang of fascists, 6,000 gangs, fascists, did to Jewish people on 7th of October 2023. This is moral blindness. And I think it probably is true. And it's of a piece with the left's attitude to 7th of October, where they continually downplay it or deny it because they can't face the truth that the side they have taken in this war is the side that did the worst thing to the Jewish people since the Nazis.
Yeah, absolutely. It is extraordinary. And again, I'm interested by why they chose to get a flotilla to Gaza, where aid is going in, and where, I've not seen any skeletal pictures, I must be honest with you. I'm sure things are difficult. They're being bombed. I completely get that. You're living under Hamas, life's pretty difficult. But I'm not quite sure we've been told about a famine pretty much since the beginning of last year. It doesn't seem to have actually come to pass. But I'm interested that they didn't think that they should send a flotilla or send their symbolic aid to the people of Sudan, where there genuinely is mass killings going on, or China. I mean, they're not that concerned about the Uyghur people in China, obviously, or maybe Syria when Assad was slaughtering people. They seem to be very fixated on the people in just one strip of land. And I know you and I've talked about this before. I can never work out what it is about this particular conflict which exercises so many people like this, but other sort of conflicts where far more people die and far more people are being subjugated, they're not that bothered about.
Exactly. I've asked this question so many times. I know you have as well, not only over the past 20 months, but over the past 20 years. Why are they so obsessed with this one tiny country that's the size of Wales and it's the only Jewish state in the whole world? Isn't that just curious?
What can it be?
What can it be? You know, and I've never heard one satisfactory answer to that question. And then they go mad at you if you say, is it because it's a Jewish nation? Well, give me another explanation, and then we will weigh that up. But, you know, in the 7 days that Greta and her chums were on their stupid boat, Israel gave out 10 million meals to people in Gaza, which I think it should. People in Gaza
It's not enough food for 2 million people, to be fair.
Yeah, they gave out millions of meals to people in Gaza while Greta and her chums were bloviating on their boat to any media channel that would listen, were taking their selfies, were pontificating, were posing as the saviors of Gaza. Yeah. They were doing moral pantomime while Israel was doing actual aid. And, you know, it's so true what you say. The suffering in Sudan at the moment is unimaginable. Children under the age of 5 are literally starving to death. And the world has turned away because the world is so obsessed with what Israel is doing in relation to its war on Hamas. It's unforgivable.
It really is. Brendan O'Neill, you've been brilliant on all these topics. Chief Political Writer at Spiked Online.